Let's you. Got it.
Okay, brilliant.
It gave me the
Right.
chance to move.
And I'm going to click start.
Yeah, you can press start.
Okay.
Just let people arrive. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I can see you're all arriving. Nice to see you. We'll just give people a few moments to join us. Thank you for coming. I know this is really late notice. I think we advertised it about 10 o'clock last night, and it was great to see over 300 wanted to be part of this seminar. So that tells us a lot about the appetite there is out there. My name is Krish Kandaya, and I am the director of the Sanctuary Foundation. And we have mobilized in order to help as many Ukrainian refugees as we can that need to come to the UK, find safe passage here and a safe welcome. And so it's been a delight. I think currently 30,000 people have signed up on the Sanctuary Foundation website. Some have done that as individuals, some have done that as families, some have done that as churches and businesses and universities and community groups. There has just been this overwhelming sense of compassion and mercy towards Ukraine. We've all been watching the terrible pictures from the news. Mariupol is the place that really gets me, you know, bombing maternity wards and children's hospitals, absolutely devastating to watch it. And so, like you, we are all just trying to do our best here to see what we can do to help. And you know, with the government's new, brand new, fresh out of the box Homes for Ukraine program, we have seen unprecedented numbers of people step forward. I think it's in the region of 200,000 people have said that they wanted to take part, which is brilliant. But as you can imagine, the system design in order to make use of all these wonderful offers is complex. And this program sits between two government departments, the Home Office, who we're privileged to be speaking with today, and the Department for Levelling Up and Communities. And the Home Office kind of looks after the visa side, and the Department for Levelling Up looks after the sponsorship side. And so, you know, it's across two government departments. And many of you have reached out through various kind of matching means. Some of you have made connections via Facebook, some have gone through kind of traditional matching services, and you might have made a connection and you're at the process where you're trying to figure out how to do the visa. And so we thought, let's invite the Home Office to come in and help us think through what's going on, what the right way to do it is, and we'll make this a kind of constructive conversation because, you know, the Home Office is working as quickly as they can. It's complicated. They've got to design a new system that's going to work well. And they've already been really gracious in listening to comments that some of you guys have made, and we've been able to offer trying to find a constructive way forward. So that is the tone of our meeting today. We're trying to find solutions, and I know some of you are frustrated and you know, you're desperate to help people, but our meeting today is going to be as constructive as we can, and we're just really pleased that David's been able to join us. David, I think you are still there. Are you there? There you are. Brilliant.
Indeed. Yeah.
Excellent. So, well, look, I want to put a bit of humanity behind the title. David is he's a guitarist. He told me today that he has 2 albums out, and one of those albums was influenced by his work with refugees. David's worked for over 20 years in the Home Office and has a particular interest in helping refugees. So when you think of the Home Office, you just think of this kind of big institution, but it's filled with people that are driven by a desire to make a difference in the world. David, tell us about your job title, what your specific role is in the Home Office.
Yeah, so I'm a policy official, although I have sort of delved into all sorts of other elements of the Home Office, including sort of operations and project management and IT delivery. But I've spent the last few years in a policy role, and actually policy quite because you actually get to make a direct difference. You get to discuss issues with ministers and actually, you know, get a view from ministers of, you know, what direction they want to take, what advice that we might supply to them, and have the opportunity to get information of what's happening on the ground, like sessions from today, and feed that directly into the advice that we give to ministers in terms of the decisions that they make moving forward. And that's why sessions like this are so important. My particular policy responsibility is for the family and human rights policy. And within that, I own the Ukraine Family Scheme. And I can say this now because it's just been announced over the last 20 minutes, the new Ukrainian extension scheme, which we might want to talk about a little bit later. And then I'm working very closely with the other policy team, supporting them with the Homes for Ukraine scheme.
Brilliant. And already seeing comments in the chat. Again, just to emphasize, you know, there'll be a range of opinions on this call about the new Nationalities and Borders Bill. That's not our conversation today. We're just trying to figure out what we can do to make this system work for Ukrainian refugees that need to come here. And we've already had a very helpful dialogue. Many of you gave us some really useful comments that has gone into the system. I think, David, you said you had a briefing you got to make to the immigration minister.
Yes, so you know, we work close with ministers all the time, and yesterday we were going through the application form that we're discussing today to look at what improvements we could make based on the feedback we've had. In fact, some of that feedback come from you just that morning, Chris, and we had the opportunity with our senior people in IT to actually look at, okay, what changes can we make immediately? What changes can we make in a few weeks and a few months?
Brilliant.
You know, a lot of things are a bit more complex than they first appear, and which things do we need to prioritize? So which things will make the biggest difference to people going through the process now?
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much. So I would say keep the questions coming in the Q&A part. We'll prioritize the questions that we think we'll actually be able to answer in our seminar today. This will be recorded and available to watch offline later as well. But David, for those that haven't started even the process, you know, maybe they haven't, you know, have no idea what they need to do. Some people would even be surprised that you as a sponsor can help fill in that visa process. Is it worth us just talking through the basics before we jump into the kind of questions that have arisen from people's experiences?
Yes, so I think the first thing is to get information. So so as a sponsor, I think it's really important that you understand what it is that you're committing to and what the criteria for the scheme may be. Now, this is a joint venture with another government department, which is the acronym we use is DLUC, which is the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And I'm sure we can share the relevant web link with those here. But they set out the criteria for sponsors and what's expected of sponsors very, very broadly. If you want to bring to sponsor someone to come from the Ukraine, you'll be expected to sponsor them usually for at least a period of 6 months. So you'll need to have suitable accommodation for them for 6 months. And you need to think really carefully, do you have that suitable accommodation? So, you know, one room to put 4 people in isn't necessarily suitable accommodation. And I think they have some basic guidelines of what that might look like. You also need to be a person who has the right immigration status to be able to sponsor individuals. And that's currently set for anyone who has leave to remain for 6 months or more. So if you have leave to remain of 6 months or more, if you have indefinite leave to remain, if you have EU settled status or EU pre-settled status, if you're a British national, and in all of those circumstances, you can sponsor under the scheme if you have the appropriate accommodation. But of course, it will be remiss of us to just look to bring people from the Ukraine without making sure that this is done in a way that's safe, and that's you know really important. So one of the requirements will be for where a Ukrainian is staying with you, and this is quite important because of course you might have alternative accommodation for them. It doesn't mean they're staying with you, but every adult in the household, including the sponsor, will need to undertake a DBS check, and these will be undertaken by the local authorities. Now, because those DBS checks won't happen immediately, and we don't want to delay things, what we will be doing is we'll be doing some security checks at the visa application point on the sponsor. So not the rest of the household, but we will do on the particular sponsor, and that's checked through our police national computer as well as our other what we call watch list checks, and we will also require an image of the sponsor's identity document. So at this stage, it's a passport or a driving license. We are quickly looking at what other solutions we might be able to provide in that space. And that's really important, so that we know that's a real person that we're checking, and isn't some sort of false identity in a bid to sort of lure a Ukrainian across. That's kind of the broad criteria.
I think that's really helpful, and I know, you know, different ones of us are at different levels of experience in this, but you know, some people are saying, well, why does there need to be a visa at all? Why can't they just come? But actually, this is about safeguarding, isn't it? It's about protecting people from exploitation. I was in Moldova at the border, and friends of mine right now are in Warsaw, kind of helping people, you know, fill out their visa application. And some of the feedback is actually many of the Ukrainians are happy that someone is doing some checking. I know that if I was, it's hard to imagine, if I was fighting a war and I had to send my wife and children out of the country, I'd want to know someone had done some due diligence before they arrived in a stranger's house. So we're with you. I guess some of the questions are going to revolve around speed and all that sort of stuff. We're going to get to those. Just walk us through a little bit the actual application. Some people have know it well, some people not so well. One of our friends has kind of helpfully screen grabbed the whole thing because they've been trying to help someone go through it. Is it worth us just talking through that just briefly before we dive into some questions?
Yes, I think it absolutely is. Now, I think the first thing to note is it quite a long application process? Is it taking people quite a lot of time to complete? The truth is, at the moment, it is. And that is because, you know, we've had to stand this up very, very quickly. We've had to make sure that we include all of those safeguarding features to keep everybody safe as part of that process. But we are then working as quickly as we can with both our IT colleagues, but also ensuring that we're getting feedback from groups like this to quickly iterate that application. So we have the technical term is a IT backlog. We have a backlog of features that we're looking to interject as soon as possible, and it may be as we go through this, I'll be able to highlight some of the improvements we are looking to make.
Thank you.
But again, I really want to hear from those at this session improvements I haven't mentioned that we're already going to make that you would like us to make, or you think would make it easier. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, and we've got Sarah in the background frantically moving slide along. So just tell us when you're ready to move along, David.
Yeah. So so what would normally happen is a person will go onto gov.uk, and there is a section called apply for I think it's a sponsorship scheme visa, and that sets out the broad requirements. And what's quite important, you should see in the top right of that screen the option for that basic guidance to be shown in Ukrainian and in Russian.
Okay.
And one of our challenges is to make sure that we've got more translation available throughout the process. But in terms of the starting point, that's what we have already. And then the individual will make will start their application, and they register their email address, and then they will register their password. And once they've got that enables them to sort of come back to the form at a later point, so they can.
Oh, good. So if you lose internet connection, it's still saved. That's really helpful. I'll tell you what, friends, loads of helpful comments coming, some not so helpful, but I understand your frustrations. If you've been through this process and you've hit a glitch, why not make a comment about what you think needs to get better as we go through? That will help us be part of the team to iterate this and make this even better. So thanks, everyone. Keep going, David.
Yeah. So and then there are a number of ways that you can do this, and it would be quite interesting to get feedback about what would help people. So you can do as suggested on this slide, that you can provide that link and password to the sponsor for them to complete their elements. Alternatively, we're also considering, do we provide a list of information that might be needed that can be provided by the sponsor to the applicant, so they can just complete all of the form in one go. So
I think that makes a lot of sense, that second,
yeah.
to offer that. So then as a sponsor, I could collect all that information and I could upload it. My internet connection might be a bit easier. It might be easier for me to generate a PDF than it would for the family on the other side. So maybe that would be really, really helpful.
From a technical and legal perspective, the final submission of the application, the final declaration, should be done by the applicants, and so in this it'll be the Ukrainian or the Ukrainian family member who's applying would need to sort of do the final submission.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Keep going.
Okay. Move on to the next slide. So I'm going to try and make this a bit bigger on my screen. I can see them. So the first question, and there's a very important reason why we put this question up front, is does somebody have a valid Ukrainian, so international Ukrainian passport? This is a very important piece of terminology here, because in the Ukraine, they have more than one type of passport. They also have what they call a domestic passport, which is a bit like an identity card, but is more like a booklet in passport form. And what we've introduced is what we call a biometric deferral process. So it's the ability for people with an international Ukrainian passport to not be required to go to a visa application centre. And therefore, it's important we ask this question up front, because it helps us route individuals through whether they need to use that visa application centre process or not. Now, I was discussing with some other stakeholders this morning. The question came up: what about where I have a child that's on a parent's passport? That links back to safeguarding. So we mentioned before how it's important to keep people safe. There are opportunities if you don't have some sort of face-to-face contact, particularly where a picture on a child on a parent's passport is, very, very young. We may have substitution. We do see this in the immigration world. So the reason we still have that visa application centre requirement in those circumstances is not a bureaucratic one. It's there to keep children safe.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So whichever option you apply for, you'll then see that basic information of what you need to do to in order to be able to apply for the scheme. Now we know that there will be people wanting to apply for both the family scheme and the Homes for Ukraine scheme. So you have the option of which to pick, which is screen number 3, and you'll then have the option of whether you're being sponsored by an organisation or an individual. At the moment, the system is set so that only the Welsh and Scottish government are organisation sponsors. Obviously, when we move to phase 2, that will likely change, and there'll be other options. So for the moment, we expect the majority of people to be being sponsored by an individual. Okay, so we'll then be looking to see whether they asking a question about whether people will be living in the Ukraine on or before the 31st of December. Why that date? Well, we needed to set that somewhere broadly, but in general terms, we're quite pragmatic in our caseworking. Someone's missed that by one day, but we look at the applications around and say actually they are resident in the Ukraine. There isn't some sort of automatic cut-off. We will be looking at all cases individually to see what's appropriate. So the other thing, we'll come on to this when we talk about evidence. I've been hearing concerns from people who would say, quite rightly, well, hang a minute, when I leave my house from the Ukraine, I wasn't expecting to have to go and grab my utility bills. I may not have them available. I might have them digitally. I may not. It's really, really important that the evidence to support this. It's great if you have it. It makes our caseworker's life easier. It makes it quicker to make a decision, but it isn't mandatory. So our caseworker guidance starts from the position of believe the applicant, and only where you have reason to really doubt that would you then go back and ask for additional evidence if it's not available. So again,
I can't read the form closely enough, David, but is that signaled there that if you have it, because that might help someone go, oh my goodness, I need to stop and start again.
This is one of the things that we were discussing yesterday with IT colleagues and the minister. The need to be a lot more clearer in the application form that certain documents are not mandatory. It is alluded to, but I think we could make that clearer up front, and we're going to do that.
And just while we're here on the language front, I understand if this was a live document, this is screen grab, so it's not quite as it is on the website. You'll be able to see some bits of it translated into Ukrainian. Is that right?
So I think the intention is, and there's, as I was alluding to before, when you deliver IT, you have to prioritize what you can
Of course.
introduce. There's a couple of parts to this. I think we're looking at sort of aid memoirs or support guidance for screens that can be available for people. And the second step, and we were discussing this yesterday, is that are there key terms within these existing texts that we can put in Ukrainian or Russian. So, for example, we talked about the Ukrainian international passport. Can we have it brackets, and then what is that in in Ukrainian? And then the next step is then understanding the logistics, and when we could, actually provide alternative forms in different languages. And that actually posits quite a lot of challenges, particularly when you're looking to refine and change language in forms, because it means if you have it in 3 languages, you have to do that development work to improve the process 3 times.
Yeah.
So,
and I was speaking to another member of your team that we can't just do the whole thing in Ukrainian because the people that are processing it are unlikely to speak Ukrainian, and that isn't something that we could help with translators and volunteers, and I'm guessing there are safeguarding and data protection issues, but for a lot of people this is the bottleneck, isn't it, of the process. So hear from us, we're keen to help you, but we recognize you're under your own constraints.
Yeah, and I'd say so that's some of the initial approach we're taking. We're very much open to looking at different ways of doing things, open to some innovations. We're really happy to sort of take those ideas, take them away, and go, actually, how else could we get around these bottlenecks?
Great, excellent.
So, move on to the next slide. Or the next section.
Next page, please, Sarah. I think you're on 4 out of 16. You need to be on page 5.
Oh no, so I think there was more on this particular.
Oh, was there? Okay, sorry.
Page. So we mentioned about registering your email earlier. You're also then required to provide information about your sponsor. So that would be the name of the person who's doing that sponsoring. I don't know if it'll be on this one. On the new version of this, when we then ask for further information, we start naming the sponsor, so it's much clearer who we're talking about. So on this, it says your sponsor. So say, for example, you put in John Smith. What will happen in the future iteration of the form is then each time we need John Smith's details, rather than say your sponsor's details, and people get confused, it will say, can you give us John Smith's address? Can you give us John Smith's details? So, and then we'll just nip back just to number 8 briefly, if that's all right. Apologies. Yeah. So, and we also asked a question around Ukrainian citizenship. So we understand that there will be split nationality households. So one member is Ukrainian, another member is from another nationality. So at the moment, our policy is that one member of the family group needs to be Ukrainian. We are looking at in terms of how does that flex, in particular, for example, if a particular member of the group is off fighting in the war. So again, we are examining that particular issue to see if we can introduce an additional piece of flex. But at the moment, the requirement is at least one member of the group has to be Ukrainian. We can move on to slide 5.
Just to reiterate that point, David. So that has come up a lot, that we're imagining, mum and the kids are being taken out of the country. Dad's probably, fighting a war. And I understand there are all sorts of issues in the UK passport world, aren't there, that you can't just take a child out without both parents' consent. But that does seem to be an ongoing issue. It's hard to ask Dad to help.
Yeah, and when we were talking about this earlier, so there's 2 parts to that. We have a bit more flexibility in the Ukraine family scheme, because a really common scenario that we might see is children coming to live with their grandparents who are living in the UK, but as you say, Dad might be fighting, mum might be deceased. So in those circumstances, we do allow single parental consent, or in some instances, assessed properly with appropriate safeguarding considerations, no parental consent. At the moment, on the Homes for Ukraine scheme, the parental consent requirement is much stricter. So currently, it requires both parents. So we're actually having some wider discussions in the next day or so to actually look at, do we want to introduce a bit of flexibility in there? But I want to be absolutely clear front on this. This is not a scheme designed for unaccompanied children. Don't think it's appropriate under this scheme for unaccompanied children to join sponsors because of the safeguarding considerations. And anyone that's worked with social service, I've adopted children. I know we were discussing this earlier. You've been involved a lot in adoption, fostering yourself. That actually making sure that we meet the needs of those children in a way that's safe is really, really important. So if the Home Office looks to do something in this space, it would have to be something really bespoke and well designed to make sure that we put the needs of those children and their welfare at the heart of what we do. And that's the reason why we're a bit more restrictive within the Homes for Ukraine scheme.
That's really helpful. So just to reiterate, we know, for example, 100,000 children in institutional care in Ukraine. Lots of people very worried about what's happening to them. That isn't the problem for the Homes for Ukraine scheme to fix, but there are other initiatives out there to see what can be done that's in the child's best interest. So, if you want to adopt a Ukrainian child, this is not your route. In fact, the Ukrainian government's asking people not to adopt Ukrainian children outside of the country. So just for clarity, this is all about sponsoring families and offering support there. And yes, we are going to address the timeline issue and the transparency issue. Thanks for raising it. We will come back to that in a minute, but it's important we do this meticulously so that you can provide feedback every step here, because some of you have hit problems that we would love to be able to feed into the next iteration. So thank you. Keep those helpful comments coming. Great, Dan. David, over to you.
Okay, so then we look to provide the details of the sponsor. So actually, I'm glad you've actually got the most recent version of the application where we're now pulling through that sponsor's name. So now we do ask for date of birth. We ask for nationality. And if they have it, a passport or travel document number, and some of those details, as well as contact details. Now, why do we ask for that? As I mentioned before, as well as the DBS checks that will be required on every adult member of the household, it is really important that we're able to make sure that we keep the applicants safe. And as such, we will do some security checks up front. So we will need the details of the sponsor to be able to do those security checks. And of course, we will then also need a copy of an identity document so that we have some assurance that person is a real person that we're doing those security checks on. So that's the purpose of these screens. And of course, if there is any concern, we ask the contact detail numbers and email address so that our caseworkers can contact the sponsor if needed. So move on to the next slide, please. So Check Your Answers is a standard page that we have on many gov.uk forms, and this is an opportunity just literally do what it says on the tin. So check what you've already put. Sometimes it's easy to click on the wrong button or click twice. We would always suggest people just double check that they've got the right information. And then there is I think a change button on the right, quite small there, against each field. So if you go through that and you say, well, actually that's wrong, that isn't quite right, you can click on that button. It will take you back to that screen, enable you to amend it, and then carry on in terms of your journey. Now, if sponsors have other names, we might ask them to provide that. And again, that's part of our security checks. We also need to know your residential address. Now, this is quite important because at the end of this process, we will provide information to the to our colleagues in DLUC, the Welsh and Scottish governments, and/or the local authorities, so that they can then do those accommodation checks that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, just while we're there, and I'm conscious we're going to run out of time. It's a long form. So a few people have asked about, will your visa application wait until you've had your home check? I think I know the answer, but let me just check in with you. Isn't it right that the local authority will retrospectively visit your home after the visa has been issued and the family has arrived?
That is the current process. So, and that does, you know, pose its own risk, because it is possible that the local authority who are committed to doing that check as soon as possible, and hopefully in most instances will be able to do that before people actually travel, may find that actually the accommodation isn't suitable, and then the local authority would then look to source and provide other accommodation. And that may be through accommodation they already hold, or it may be they might contact other people who have maybe sponsored that haven't yet found a family to sponsor, and see if they will then provide support.
That's right. Brilliant. Very good. Okay. I'm worried we're going to run out of time, David, and I've got about 23 questions lined up for you.
So we can either go through more form, or we can go through some questions. I'm not
Should
sure
we take a few questions and then come back, or were there specific parts of the form you think we really need to zero in on?
So just to highlight on number 16, because I when I looked at the form, I noticed this. So there's a section for local authority, which isn't automatically the one in your address necessarily. So I used to live in a little village called Dinnington. I had a workshop telephone number, Sheffield address, but my local authority was Rotherham. And this is important because, again, we're passing some of this information to the local authority so they can put the support package in place for these individuals. So something to highlight is, do double check that you know, so whether you're paying a council tax to, you've got the right local authority for that location.
Right.
So
Okay.
and that'll be of the where the accommodation is. So if you've got accommodation somewhere else, it's the accommodation for that local authority is what's needed.
Brilliant. Excellent. Now, let's dive into some of those questions, and thank you, David, for going through it. People are asking, can that bunch of slides be available afterwards? Yes, that was made by mother, sister, daughter, a little group based near where I live. So thank you for making that available to us. That's really helpful today. And there is some confusion about the system. So some people very experienced, done it lots before, other people brand new. So a couple of general statements. So firstly, the sponsoring of or finding someone to sponsor is not currently being handled by the government. The government has encouraged civil society individuals to make their own way. There are different ways you can do that. Some of you will do that yourselves on Facebook, or you'll have a friend of a friend and you make those connections. Others will use more formal routes like the Reset group, and a lot of people kind of concerned they're not hearing a lot through those other routes, those matching routes. I'm not responsible for any of those, but a lot of them are gearing up from zero and trying to cope with the kind of scale of things. So that's what's going on there. Another question has come in about timeline, and I imagine this is how long is a piece of string, but if you've got a family that you're really trying to help and you're trying to work out how you're going to get them to the UK, do you book a flight or not, just having no idea when or where or how, it is quite disconcerting, and a lot of people getting quite anxious about that. I guess, what can you tell us already about how long people should expect? Someone saying they've been waiting 10 days already, and is there any future plans? I guess you'd almost like a little loading bar that says, okay, we're halfway there, is there any way that flow of information could help? Because that seems to make people quite anxious.
I've run brand new schemes as an operations manager prior to coming to policy many times over the years, and what I've always found is the particular challenge usually in those first early days. So we have people talking in Q&A about sort of IT bugs, really understanding the processes, making sure we're getting the right information from users, and if not, going back to get that right information. So what we normally find is that is over the first week or two, as we get all of those different elements into place, we process cases at a particular pace, but we then start very quickly becoming much more efficient and can then start processing cases a lot faster than we were doing in the early days. So effectively sort of a ramping up curve, and that's exactly what I would expect to see within the scheme. So we've not published I think numbers yet. I think we'll be doing that shortly. We saw this with the family scheme. So I think if you'll remember in the sort of first early days, or the first 2 or 3 days, lots of questions. You've only processed X number of cases, and actually now we process more than 20,000 cases in the space of 3 weeks. and that's phenomenal. And to put
It
that,
is, yeah.
put that into context, it's a different scheme, but our commitment for Afghan resettlements was 20,000 over several years. We've done that in 3 weeks, which is
Yes, yes.
is really, really good. And I expect, in a similar way, we're going to have that ramp up. Now, this scheme is more complex than the family scheme because there's this extra sponsor step. There are these additional security checks, and sometimes we may need to go back out to the sponsor to verify information and check that to keep people safe, because we've got this additional safeguarding risk. So that does mean, and I totally appreciate why there's some more frustrations over time, but I would fully expect those numbers to go up. Can't commit to turnaround times at the moment, but I think it's safe to say it's really high priority for the Home Office to get these processed as quick as it can.
Brilliant. And I guess from our side, we know lots of people that would love to add extra person power to your teams if that was the issue. But understand there are lots of issues around data and security. So hear you. It's a new scheme. It's going to take some time. As a foster parent, training to be and approved to be a foster carer took a lot longer than we wanted it to. You're desperate to help kids, but there are safeguarding issues, and we need to make sure things are done right. So thanks for answering that one. A few questions about DBS. I'm guessing that's more a DLUC issue, but would the DBS, I think you said it earlier, that the police national records check is happening quickly because we recognise that the DBS check might take a bit longer. So is it right, the DBS check doesn't preclude the visa application actually going forward?
That's correct. So we will do our basic security checks with the police national computer. So we put them in our system. I think they get processed overnight, and then we get those records, so we can do that quite quickly. And then the DBS check will then be done by the local authority after we've issued the visa. And again, the local authority is committed to turning those around as quick as possible. I know you're picking questions, Chris, but there's one in particular I realised I was going to talk about, but I've not mentioned before.
Go for it.
A few times I wanted to pick out from Rebecca regarding whether documents need to be notarized and translated letter. Now, in normal visa processes, we normally require documents in different languages to be translated and notarized. This is to avoid things like forgeries. And there's an automatic letter that goes at the end of a process, I think from UK, that goes out and has this line within it. We've identified that issue. We're going to amend that for this scheme. I want to be absolutely clear. You do not need to provide translated copies of documents. You do not need to provide notarized copies for this. If you happen to have them, always useful. But again, like I said, with those other documents, they're not mandatory. Casework guidance is very clear. Believe the applicant, and only where you have room for doubt do we then go out to get additional information.
Brilliant. That's so helpful. Were there other questions you thought you wanted to take a go at? I've got one about the visa application centres. So I was just chatting to Greg, who is at the kind of Poland, Ukraine border. It seems they've got to travel quite a long way to get to a visa application centre to get some documents signed off. Talk to me about what's going on there, and is that going to be needed in the future?
Yeah. So as I said before, we've introduced this biometric deferral process. So for that quite a large cohort of users where they've got that international passport, they don't need to visit a visa application centre. But we recognise not everybody is in that position. So so for those that don't, they will need to attend a visa application centre. We're doing a lot of work to marshal additional resources at all of our visa application centres, and the particular pinch point is still Poland, and we're doing more work every day to see how we can bolster the capacity. Brilliant.
Let's bring Sarah in now. Sarah's been tirelessly working away in the background. Thank you very much, Sarah, for helping. You're a volunteer, both with Sanctuary Foundation, but also in your local area. Just as someone that's working with hosts, what are some of the questions that you're seeing in our chat that your hosts are also concerned about?
Yes, there's quite a few familiar ones here. So lots of questions about DBS checks, which I think you've answered. The same about housing. We've had lots of suggestions on how the application form could be improved. I think there's a repeat text that comes at the top of every page. Maybe that's changed now, but I think people felt that just sort of made it harder to go through. Also a question around once the visa application has been submitted, if people then realise that maybe that there are documents missing, for instance, parental consent letters, is that something that can be added later?
Yeah, so once it's submitted, what would normally happen is where possible, we would look to try to make a decision and grant on the documents that we have. If they're a particularly important piece of information, parental consent may well be one because of safeguarding issues, and the caseworker will contact the person that made the application and ask them to then provide that document. So that would normally be the process. If you've not been contacted for that document, that's because we try to be as pragmatic as possible and look to see whether we can grant your case without that required document.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. So the housing question, again, this is probably, remember, this is over 2 government departments. The Home Office are looking over the visas, and the Department for Levelling Up are looking after the sponsorship program. But someone was asking, I've got an empty house. Do they have to live with me? I think that's more of a Department for Levelling Up question. But as I understand it, the Ukraine Homes for Ukraine scheme is you are offering to help someone in your house. They are eligible to housing benefit. So if you are able to help them find a house, then they can use housing benefit as soon as that's available. So it doesn't have to be for the whole 6 months they stay with you, but you're like a backstop in case you can't find them other forms of housing. But I'm guessing that's out of your area of expertise. Am I right,
yes,
David?
so I think those definitions do sit with the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities. What I would say is we set out in the immigration rules, which we've laid today, we set that out in a way that it doesn't preclude that. So from an immigration perspective, as long as our colleagues in DLUC are happy, yes, you could provide an accommodation that you don't live in and provide that to Ukrainians. So I think we just need to clarify the other side of that with DLUC colleagues.
That's great. Question from Greg at the border. So he's at the TLS. I don't know what that stands for, in Warsaw. Just chatted to a Home Office employee who told us that many people are getting emails being told their visas are ready. So they travel up to 5 hours to Warsaw to collect them, then are being told the visas are not actually ready and have to come back again in 3 days. That sounds like a glitch in the system.
That shouldn't be happening, but we'll take that back to base to have a look at. Because if that is happening, we it probably is. Because,
yeah, Greg's there. I've got confidence in him. But
then Greg, we're going to go away and see what we can do to fix that. Because that shouldn't be how the process is working.
That's great. Excellent. Okay, so chat. I'm looking at the chat. If there's any last questions, we have a few minutes left. I think we've tried to answer your questions as best we can. I'm hearing your frustration. That I want to say to you, look, friends, it's brilliant that you are so passionate wanting to help Ukrainian refugees. You need to hear that people on the other side, I don't work for the government. That lots of things the government does makes me as frustrated as you. But I'm finding on both sides of, our side, civil society and government, everyone is trying to do their best here. And it's an imperfect system. If we'd have given people 6 months, it would have been very different, but we're doing this at pace. So your constructive comments help the government do a better job to find the flaws, to fix the issues. And together we're going to make a difference. So thank you for keeping on going. I'm just looking last couple of orders. Where are we going? About the order of visas. Okay, someone asked a question about how are you deciding what order the visas are being processed in? Is there some kind of prioritization based on vulnerability or other factors, or how? Again, you might not be able to tell us, but what can you tell us?
Yeah, so generally speaking, with visas, things are normally processed in date order. However, vulnerability is important. So where we identify vulnerable or safeguarding issues, we quite often pick those out to make sure that they're considered, often by a more senior manager or whatever, as early as we can in the process.
That's great. And what about someone who's in Ukraine and they're thinking of coming, they're going to make a kind of dangerous journey, versus someone in Poland or Romania or Moldova, and it's not great there, but safer than Ukraine? Is there any differentiator in that process?
I actually don't know the answer to that question, which is a shame, because I think I've managed to answer most.
You've done very well.
I'll have to go. I'll have to go back actually and talk to the relevant team.
Brilliant, excellent. Okay, friends, I know we haven't answered every question that you've hoped we'd be able to look at. We're not looking at specific cases, but I think you've heard how the process works. We try to be as open, as transparent as we can. We are doing our best as civil society, and you can hear government doing its best too. I know for some of you that doesn't answer the heartache that you've got, that you're trying desperately to get people through. We're with you. We keep going. Quick question on what age someone becomes an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child. I think if they're under 18, that is the UN definition of a child. If they're over 18, they're considered an adult. I know that's complicated because lots of over 18s need all the support they can get, but under 18s is still the definition in this case too. Is that right, David?
I believe that to be the case, yes.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So what I would say is, if you have concrete examples of where the system isn't quite working, specific things that you think we can fix, brilliant. Let's keep that information flow. As you heard, this informs government policy. We can help make it better. And thank you so much for joining. Watch this space for more Sanctuary Foundation events. We have one for businesses coming soon and community organisers. But have a fantastic day, everyone. And huge thank you to Sarah for managing comments in the background, and for David putting himself in the firing line. And David wouldn't let me tell you, but his album is available on Spotify if you want to hear an album about about refugees. But really nice to meet you. Appreciate your time, and thanks so much for what you're doing. We're cheering you on, and yeah, we look forward to receiving our refugee sponsors into our homes and helping them make their lives have a new start here. So thanks, everybody. Talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks.